Keir Starmer built his premiership on the promise that Britain would be a trusted partner on the world stage, and the partners are now walking away. Here is exactly which allies have abandoned him, what broke each relationship, and whether the isolation can be reversed before it destroys his government's credibility completely. When the United States and Israel launched epic fury against Iran on February 28th, Starmer made a calculated decision to refuse American requests for access to British bases at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford. That decision was meant to preserve Britain's relationship with international law and avoid the catastrophic mistake of the Iraq War. Instead, it triggered the most rapid deterioration of Allied confidence in a British Prime Minister in modern history. The breaking point came in stages. Trump's first public denunciation arrived within hours of Starmer's refusal on the bases. The American president called him disappointing and suggested Britain was no longer the ally Washington once knew. By March 3rd, Trump had escalated to open mockery, telling the Telegraph that Starmer should have fought for Diego Garcia instead of negotiating it away to Mauritius, and questioning whether the Prime Minister was pandering to Muslim voters. By March 5th, Trump was declaring the special relationship effectively over and dismissing Starmer as someone who contributes nothing and is not even a good ally anymore. 3 denunciations in 7 days is not normal diplomatic friction. It is a calculated campaign to isolate a British Prime Minister, and it worked. But Trump was not alone. Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese, the leaders of centre-left governments in Canada and Australia, publicly backed the Iran strikes without hesitation. Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, dismissed international law as having relatively little effect and warned that this was not the time to lecture partners and allies. Emmanuel Macron responded to Starmer's suggestion that Trump lacked a thought-through plan by announcing an immediate increase in the French nuclear arsenal and deploying nuclear-armed aircraft to European allies. Within 72 hours of the strike's beginning, every major Western ally had either explicitly backed the American action or positioned themselves in direct opposition to Starmer's legal caution. Britain was alone. The domestic mechanics make the international isolation worse. Starmer wanted to grant limited access to Diego Garcia and Fairford for the strikes. He was blocked by an alliance of Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves, and Yvette Cooper in a National Security Council meeting on the Friday the strikes began. The Attorney General Richard Hermer had ruled 17 days earlier that international law did not permit preemptive strikes unless there was an imminent threat to Britain. But Starmer had 17 days to prepare a position, and he spent those days dithering instead of deciding. When the moment came, he could not carry his own cabinet, and he received no credit from anyone for the compromise position he eventually landed on. The opposition seized on the weakness immediately. Kemi Badenoch accused Starmer of abandoning US allies and warned that Britain was losing the respect of its partners. Nigel Farage called Britain humiliated and said the country's reputation was going down the drain because Starmer was incapable of making a decision. Both opposition leaders framed the issue as Starmer prioritising Muslim voters over national security, a charge Starmer has spent the past week trying to rebut without success. The consequences Britain is experiencing right now are material and mounting. Oil prices surged past $104 a barrel by March 10th, briefly touching $119 as the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed. Goldman Sachs is warning that prices could reach $150 a barrel by the end of March if the strait remains shut. Some traders are raising the prospect of $200 or even $250 in a worst-case scenario. Britain imports energy, and Britain is absorbing that shock in household budgets and business costs with no cushion and no plan. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research has modelled the macroeconomic impacts, and the projections are brutal. Inflation could return to 5%. Interest rates could rise instead of fall. Mortgages could become more expensive just as families thought relief was coming. The diplomatic consequences are equally concrete. British military assets in Cyprus were struck by an Iranian drone on March 1st, hitting the runway at RAF Akrotiri with Russian-supplied ordnance on sovereign British territory. Gulf allies, including the UAE, Bahrain and Jordan, expressed open fury at what they perceived as British abandonment, while Iranian missiles targeted their cities. Britain has 200,000 nationals in the region, and Starmer has spent the crisis asking them to register their presence and follow Foreign Office advice because the government cannot guarantee their security. Starmer has made attempts to repair the damage. On March 1st, after the Iranian drone strike on Cyprus, Starmer reversed his position on the bases and announced that the United States could use British facilities for a specific and limited defensive purpose, defined as destroying Iranian missiles at source. That reversal was meant to demonstrate that Britain was still a reliable partner when British interests were directly threatened. It failed to land. Trump dismissed the gesture and continued his public attacks. The British public opposed the reversal by 50% to 41%, even with the missile sites only caveat included. Labor backbenchers, including Richard Bergen, accused Starmer of siding with Trump and dragging Britain into a wider conflict. The reassertion attempt satisfied no one. The polling tells the story of a Prime Minister whose political reserves were never deep enough to absorb a crisis of this scale. YouGov data from January showed just 18% of Britons holding a favourable view of Starmer, with 75% seeing him unfavourably. A net rating of -57. More than half the public, 55% according to Opinium, believe he should resign as Labour leader. Those numbers were recorded before the Iran crisis began. The crisis has made them worse. 47% of the British public now say Starmer has managed the UK response to the conflict badly, compared to 34% who say he has managed it well. The historical precedents trend in one direction. Anthony Eden never recovered from Suez. Tony Blair survived Iraq, but left office damaged and loathed by millions who once supported him. Starmer does not have a credible alternative narrative because the one he offered was rejected by allies on all sides. His cabinet is not loyal because they blocked him in the National Security Council and leaked the details to the press within hours. The underlying situation has not stabilised because Iran continues to launch retaliatory strikes. Oil prices continue to rise, and the economic shock has not yet fully materialised in British inflation data. Starmer told the British public that grown-up, professional, evidence-based leadership was different in kind from the chaos of the Conservative years. The Iran crisis has challenged that premise at its foundation. This is not a scandal about expenses or a policy reversal on tax. This is a crisis about whether Britain can be trusted to make decisions and sustain them when the stakes are highest. Starmer promised that his government would restore Britain as a serious partner on the world stage. The partners have responded by walking away publicly with quotes for attribution and timelines that can be verified. The political window for recovery exists, but it is narrow and it requires conditions Starmer does not control. Recovery requires either a change in the military situation that removes the pressure on Britain, or a change in the political story that gives the public and the parliamentary party a reason to extend trust again. Neither has happened. The military situation is escalating. Oil prices are rising. The political story is one of isolation, not partnership. A Prime Minister with deep reserves of political capital can absorb a foreign policy crisis and emerge intact. A Prime Minister whose approval ratings were already at historic lows before the crisis began is in a fundamentally different position. The question that defines everything that follows is whether a British Prime Minister can govern effectively when the international partners he promised to strengthen have visibly withdrawn their confidence and support. If Gulf allies re-engage and the economic data stabilises, the narrative can still be managed. If the isolation deepens and the oil shock materialises, the conversation inside Labor stops being about how to recover and starts being about who comes next. The early indicators are not pointing toward recovery. They are pointing toward a government that made promises about Britain's place in the world and is now living with consequences it did not anticipate and cannot control. If you like this video, make sure you don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment behind. It's a small way to support this channel and keep it going. See you next time.